The Cadillac's engine ticked softly as I eased it into the circular drive, the fountain sending up a spray of water that caught the last light of the afternoon. Celeste's house rose in sharp lines of white and glass, a structure that seemed more like a statement than a home. I shut the car door and adjusted the strap of my handbag. The gift bag pressed against my side. Inside were the earrings that once belonged to my mother, and the photo album I thought might remind my daughter of simpler years. I climbed the front steps and pressed the brass doorbell. A chime echoed faintly inside. Rich and melodic, I waited, smoothed the front of my blouse, and tried again. Silence. No footsteps. No voices. Not even the muffled sound of a television. Heat from the concrete seeped through the soles of my shoes as I stood there. Uncertainty growing heavier with every passing second. I knocked firmly on the oak door, my knuckles ringing against its polished surface. Still nothing. That was when I heard hurried footsteps from the hedge to my left. A man emerged, sweat darkening the collar of his polo shirt, hedge trimmer still in his gloved hands. His glasses slipped down his nose as he stared at me with wide, desperate eyes. "You need to leave," he hissed, glancing toward the silent house. "Run away before it's too late." I gripped the handle of the gift bag tighter. "Excuse me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Your daughter and her husband are dangerous. You don't know what they've done." The words clung to me as I looked back at the locked door, my pulse quickening, the house looming larger now in the gathering dusk. I could still see the scene as if it had happened that morning. My small Phoenix bungalow, the suitcase open on the bed, clothes folded into neat stacks. On the dresser sat the phone where Celeste's voice had reached me just a week earlier, halting and softer than I remembered. "Mom, I know it's been too long. Grant and I want you to come visit. I owe you an apology. For a moment I hadn't trusted my ears. After years of silence, years of strained words and unanswered calls, the invitation had sounded like a door cracking open. Robert would have said not to leap at it. He'd always cautioned me to stand firm. Even with family, love them, he used to tell me, but don't bend until you break. His absence pressed harder than ever as I folded the cream-colored blouse he'd once admired and tucked the old photo album alongside it. I told myself I wasn't bending. I was giving Celeste a chance to mend what was broken. The road out of Phoenix had stretched straight and familiar, the desert shimmering under a rising sun. Saguaros lifted their arms like guardians, and the sky opened wide in shades of copper and pale blue. As the Cadillac hummed along Interstate 10, memories rose unbidden, Robert driving us to Roosevelt Lake, Celeste dozing in the back seat with a paperback on her lap, the smell of sun-warmed upholstery filling the car. For a time, those recollections soothed me, convincing me that reconciliation was possible. By mid-afternoon, I'd crossed into California, palm trees replacing cactus, the air thickening with coastal damp. Hope swelled with every mile, even as worry pricked at the edges. The gift bag on the passenger seat was a reminder I wasn't coming empty-handed. I was coming with pieces of our past, ready to be laid on her table. The memory of that drive steadied me now as I faced the neighbor's warning, my hand still tight on the bag while the house before me remained locked in silence. The man's voice trembled as though every word risked being overheard. He glanced toward the fountain, then back at the front door. "Your daughter's husband's father, healthy man. Golfed twice a week. He dropped dead last year, right after visiting them." I shook my head before I even realized I was doing it. People die suddenly. Heart attacks. Strokes. It happens. His grip on the hedge trimmer tightened. Not like this. He was poisoned. I heard the paramedics. Vomiting. Convulsions. They buried him quick. No questions asked. And then new cars, renovations, trips. all paid for out of nowhere. A chill brushed down my spine despite the California warmth. Still, I found myself searching for explanations that fit more comfortably. You're making a lot of assumptions. Maybe you resent them for living here, for having money. He pushed his glasses higher on his nose, eyes darting to the camera above the doorway. I'm telling you what I've seen. They keep bottles under the sink that don't belong in a house. Chemicals with skulls on the labels. I've landscaped long enough to know the difference between weed killer and something meant for people. I don't want you walking in blind. The weight of his words pressed heavy, but so did the memory of Celeste's phone call, her hesitant apology, her promise of a home-cooked meal, her voice softening as if she'd finally wanted me back. I clutched the gift bag, the earrings inside cool against my palm. Could I believe that my only child, the girl I'd nursed through fevers and cheered from school bleachers, was capable of what this neighbor described? Len lowered his voice further, urgency bleeding through. Just watch yourself. Don't eat or drink a thing until you know what you're dealing with. The doorbell chime still echoed faintly in my ears, unanswered, while the man's warning settled like grit in my throat. I wanted to dismiss him, but unease had already taken root, and it clung to me as the sound of a car engine approached from down the quiet street. The hum of a sleek engine grew louder until a silver BMW glided into the drive, its paint gleaming in the fading light. Len retreated quickly behind his hedge, leaving me standing on the steps as Celeste and Grant emerged, framed by the spray of the fountain. Mom Celeste's voice rang out, warm and polished. She hurried forward, heels clicking against stone, her arms wrapping around me in a perfumed embrace. We're so sorry traffic was awful. Grant followed with an easy smile, slipping off his sunglasses. You wouldn't believe downtown on a Friday. We hated keeping you waiting. I found myself nodding, the neighbor's warning still echoing, though I forced my own smile. Celeste took the gift bag from my hand with delight, peeking at the photo album as if rediscovering a treasure. Oh, you brought this. I can't wait to show Grant the pictures. They ushered me inside with exaggerated cheer. Marble floors stretched beneath a chandelier that scattered prisms across the walls. The living room opened to a canyon view that glowed with sunset, every detail curated like a magazine spread. Grant swept a hand toward the windows. Not bad. Right. We wanted a place that really captured Los Angeles light. Celeste's voice chimed in, rehearsed pride beneath her tone. The kitchen was completely redone. Come, Mom. You have to see it. Stainless steel gleamed. Counters spotless. Every appliance new enough to blind. She moved gracefully to the stove, setting down her bag and tying on an apron. Grant uncorked a bottle of wine, the cork releasing with a satisfying pop. He poured into crystal glasses, sliding one toward me for the guest of honor. Celeste hummed softly as she arranged herbs, the tune striking a chord deep in memory. It was the same melody my own mother once hummed while stirring soup on our worn stove in Phoenix. Hearing it here felt dissonant, like a performance rehearsed for effect. I wrapped my hands around the stem of the glass, the ruby liquid catching candlelight. Their smiles were bright, their voices easy. But beneath the surface, every gesture seemed too polished, too deliberate, as if I were the audience to a play they had staged long before my arrival. The air in the kitchen smelled of garlic and rosemary as Celeste moved about with practiced grace. Grant leaned casually against the counter, swirling his own glass of wine, telling some story about a client who had mistaken him for an actor. I laughed politely, though my throat was dry. The untouched wine in front of me glistened like a test. I'll just get a glass of water, I said lightly, pushing back from the island before either of them could object. The sink was tucked beneath a broad window that framed the fading canyon light. I opened the cabinet beneath for a tumbler, expecting to find a stack of neatly stored glasses. Instead, cleaning supplies lined the shelf dish soap, a half-empty spray bottle, paper towels, and behind them, barely hidden, a small brown bottle with a stark white label. My hand froze. The black lettering was clinical. Precise potassium cyanide. Handle with extreme care. A skull and crossbones stared up at me, grinning through the gloom. A current of cold rushed through me, drowning out the hum of conversation behind my back. Len's words thundered in memory chemicals with skulls on the labels. My pulse roared in my ears. I forced myself to slide the bottle back where it had been, nestling it between the sprays as if nothing had shifted. My hands trembled, but I steadied them against the counter before standing upright. A glass sat conveniently on the top shelf after all, as if Celeste had known I'd come looking. The faucet's rush masked my ragged breath. I filled the glass, raised it to my lips, and swallowed cool water, though it did nothing to ease the dryness in my throat. Turning back, I found Grant watching me, smile fixed, eyes unreadable. Celeste hummed her tune, chopping parsley with steady strokes. The neighbor hadn't lied. The evidence was here, within arm's reach, waiting to be used. My smile had to hold as I walked back to the island. From this moment on, the goal was no longer reconciliation. It was survival. Plain and urgent. The dining room glowed with chandelier light, china and silver laid out as though we were about to be photographed for a magazine. Grant poured the wine generously, his hand steady, his voice smooth. "To family," he said, raising his glass with theatrical warmth. Celeste mirrored him, sliding my glass closer with a practiced motion. I noticed the subtle switch her hand brushing the stems, the faint pause as she ensured the glass nearest me was the one she intended. I lifted it slowly, letting the candlelight catch the surface. The ruby liquid shimmered, beautiful and deadly. I tipped the rim toward my lips, let it touch, then lowered it again with a small smile. "Lovely aroma," I murmured, buying time. Grant's eyes lingered, but he seemed satisfied. Celeste leaned back, humming faintly as if dinner were nothing more than a celebration. The pressure in the room thickened, every breath measured. Halfway through Grant's story about Beverly Hills property values, I set down my napkin. "Excuse me just a moment," I said. "I'll be right back." My voice was steady enough, though my palms were damp. I walked the length of the hallway, forcing my steps even inside the bathroom. I turned the lock with a quiet click. My phone was in my bag. My hands shook as I fished it out and pressed 911, lowering the volume before lifting it to my ear. 911. "What's your emergency?" "This is Marjorie Alden," I whispered. "I'm at my daughter's house in Beverly Hills. They've tried to poison me. There's a bottle of potassium cyanide under the kitchen sink. I saw it. They put something in my wine." The dispatcher's tone sharpened. "Ma'am, are you safe right now? They don't know I called. Please hurry. Officers are en route. Approximately 20 minutes. Stay calm. Act normal if you must rejoin them. Do not consume anything." I thanked her in a whisper, ended the call, and let the phone rest against the sink as I steadied my breathing. My reflection in the mirror looked older, paler, but my eyes were clear. I practiced a smile, the kind that had gotten me through faculty meetings and funerals alike, until it felt almost convincing. When I unlocked the door, the scent of roasted meat and herbs drifted toward me, pulling me back to the table where two faces waited for me to play my part. I returned to the dining room to find Celeste standing with a glass pitcher, ruby liquid catching the chandelier light. "Apple cranberry blend," she said brightly. "So much healthier than wine. You'll love it." "Mom." Grant reached for the glasses, his smile taut, his voice eager. She's perfected it. Just one sip. You'll see. The sound came before I could answer hard raps on the front door, followed by a firm voice calling, "Beverly Hills Police Department." Celeste's smile faltered. Grant froze with the glasses halfway down to the table. I stood quickly, the relief nearly buckling my knees. "I'll get it," I said, moving past them before they could recover. 3 uniformed officers filled the doorway when I opened it, their presence heavy with authority. "Ma'am, we received a call about a possible poisoning," the lead officer said. Grant stepped forward, his tone suddenly slick with disbelief. "Poisoning? That's absurd. Someone must have made a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "They tried to poison me tonight. The glasses are still on the table. The bottle is under the sink in the kitchen." Celeste laughed, brittle and high. "Mother, what are you talking about? You must be exhausted from the drive." "Please, officers." She's confused. But the officers were already moving. One stepped into the dining room, photographing the glasses, while another disappeared into the kitchen. Within moments, he called back. "Found it. Brown bottle. Potassium cyanide. Right where she said." Grant's face drained of color. "That's not ours." Anyone could have Len appeared on the walkway, drawn by the flashing lights. His voice carried across the room as he gestured toward me. "I told her earlier. I warned her. They did the same thing to his father." The weight of his words seemed to thicken the air. Celeste stopped smiling altogether, her hands rigid at her sides. The officers exchanged glances, one pulling handcuffs from his belt. I steadied myself against the doorframe, the gift bag forgotten at my feet. As the carefully staged performance of family warmth collapsed under the bright, unyielding light of truth, the months that followed blurred into a sequence of hearings, depositions, and long evenings alone in a rented apartment near downtown Los Angeles. By September, I found myself seated in Los Angeles Superior Court, the seal of the state glinting above the judge's bench, a jury of 12 waiting for testimony. The prosecution laid their case with relentless precision. Photographs of the dining table, crystal glasses still stained with red liquid, lab reports confirming cyanide traces in both the wine and the juice. Financial documents showing how quickly Celeste and Grant had spent through the inheritance from his father. New cars. International travel. A house far beyond their visible means. Then came the revelation that chilled even me. Investigators had reopened the file on Grant's father's death. Healthy at 70, he had collapsed within days of a dinner at their home. No autopsy had been performed then. Now, with exhumation and testing, cyanide appeared again. Unmistakable. When my turn came, I stood at the witness stand and placed my hand on the Bible. My voice held steady, though my heart strained against my ribs. I told the jury what I had seen: the brown bottle under the sink, the glass pushed toward me at the table, the humming tune that once belonged to my mother. I described the call from the bathroom, whispering for help while I rehearsed a smile in the mirror. Across the courtroom, Celeste sat stiff and expressionless, her eyes fixed anywhere but mine. Grant whispered constantly to his attorneys, his jaw clenched, his tie perfect, as though neatness could undo what had been done. 2 days of deliberation ended with the foreman rising, verdict slip in hand. Guilty of attempted murder, guilty of conspiracy. The words struck harder than I had prepared for. Final and irreversible. I left the courtroom knowing justice had been delivered, yet also knowing the cost was my only daughter. Winter settled over Southern California with a coolness I hadn't expected, mornings pale with mist rolling down from the San Gabriels. I had rented a modest apartment in Pasadena, just a 1-bedroom with thin walls and a balcony that overlooked a row of jacaranda trees. It was close enough to the courthouse that I could manage the hearings without long drives, far enough from Beverly Hills that I could breathe. Back in Phoenix, my house went on the market and sold within weeks. Packing it up had felt like boxing years of my life into cartons marked with words like kitchen and memories. Robert's tools went to a neighbor who still worked his own yard. The proceeds, along with funds the court returned after seizing assets from Celeste and Grant, gave me choices I hadn't expected. I made one decision without hesitation: a scholarship fund for single mothers at the community college where I'd taught. It bore Robert's name. He would have approved of turning something poisoned into something that might nourish others. Yet even with good acts, the nights were difficult. Betrayal echoes louder in silence. And sometimes I woke convinced I could still hear Celeste humming that old tune in my ear. I tried not to linger on the courtroom image of her staring past me. Unflinching, she was alive. But I had lost her all the same. So I built a new rhythm. Morning walks down Colorado Boulevard, afternoons at the library, evenings on the balcony with tea. It was quieter, smaller, lonelier, but it was mine. And it asked nothing from me that I couldn't give. By spring, the jacarandas bloomed violet, their blossoms scattering across the sidewalk like offerings. And I began to believe that life could still be tended, even after the roots had been cut. Spring deepened, and the balcony in Pasadena became my small sanctuary. I filled pots with basil, thyme, and tomatoes, the smell of earth clinging to my hands as I worked. The garden wasn't much, but it was alive, and it grew under my care. Inside, the kitchen bore its own change. A sturdy lock had been fastened to the cupboard beneath the sink. It was unnecessary, perhaps even symbolic, but each time I turned the key, I felt a line drawn between the past and the life I was learning to guard. One Saturday morning, a knock came at the door. For an instant, my chest tightened. Then I opened it to find Len holding a potted rosemary plant, its green sprigs fragrant in the cool air. "Figured your balcony could use this," he said. His voice was steady, no longer carrying the edge of fear I'd first heard in Beverly Hills. I set the plant beside the tomatoes, brushing soil from my fingers. "Thank you," I said. "It'll be good company out here." We stood for a moment among the pots and blossoms, the city faint in the distance. I realized then that family was not bound by blood alone. It was measured in respect, in quiet gestures, in the kind of presence that didn't demand but offered. When Len left, I sat with the rosemary at my side, the cupboard locked behind me, and the day stretching forward with a fragile kind of peace. When the past knocks again, will you answer, or keep the door closed for good?